Well, it's official. The first ever 12-team college football playoffs are officially set. But did the committee get it right?
Checking down eight. Minshew. Taylor. Nelson applied. Fries a block. He'll corkscrew.
J.J. McCarthy looking over the middle. Caught. Touchdown Wolverines. Levine blocked by Turner.
An opening drive. Oladipo. And that's from
Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Nick Solomon Show, the Sports Chatter podcast. And guys, I'm excited to bring this episode. Why? Because I am happily and excited to talk about the first ever 12-team college football playoffs. That's right. This year and for years going forward, we are having a new format being brought to us for the college football end of their regular season. They have introduced an extended playoff version than what they have done the past 10 years. So, to catch you guys up a little bit to speed here, before the college football, I don't know what you would call it, committee or maybe set of people who ranked each of the teams after each week, wins, losses, and decided who was ranked ahead or below certain teams. Usually the top two teams, or in some cases what the committee felt were the top two overall teams, they would designate those two teams as the two teams to play for the national championship, whether it be in a Rose Bowl, a Cotton Bowl, Orange Bowl, etc. Then, in 2014, they changed it. So before it was called the BCS National Championship. Then the college football playoffs as a brand was born in 2014. That consisted of the new CFP 4-team playoff format, where, as it says in the title, 4 teams then would compete. 2 matchups, and then the winner of the 2 said matchups would then meet against each other for the national championship game. And that was exciting. It brought more teams an opportunity to compete for it. It gave a little bit more sense of urgency at the end of the years, and especially to maybe build your schedule out to make it look competitive, but maybe not overly competitive to where it may look like you may get beaten. So for 10 years, we had the 14 college playoff. But in recent years, there's been much controversy as far as which teams should or shouldn't get in, especially if you're that 5 or 6 seed and you felt like you were better than either 4, 3, 2 ranked teams, but you were left out for whatever specific reason. As an example, last year, Florida State, undefeated, but because their star quarterback was injured, second to the last game of the regular season, they were left out in favor of Alabama. Not saying that they felt like Alabama was the better team. Maybe they were, but Florida State surely had the resume that they deserved to be given the opportunity to play. Now, maybe they still would have gotten destroyed or beaten, and they felt Alabama would have given the audiences a better game, in which case that game was a classic, Alabama versus Michigan. But Florida State was essentially just robbed of this opportunity, and they were placed 6th, I believe, when the final rankings came out. So a couple of years ago, it was announced that they would be expanding the field to 12 teams. This gives a lot more teams even more of a reason for their players to continue to compete well at the end of the season, because you would have an opportunity to be one of the 12 teams. So without further ado, here are the 12 teams in the first ever college football playoffs. And I will just go from the number 1 seed all the way down to the 12th seed. Now, again, the order of this seeding here was not the order in which these teams ended their ranking at the end of the year. Okay? So, who are the 12 teams? It is the Oregon Ducks, the Georgia Bulldogs, Boise State Broncos, Arizona State Red Devils, Texas Longhorns, Penn State Nittany Lions, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, Ohio State Buckeyes, the Tennessee Volunteers, the Indiana Hoosiers, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs, and the Clemson Tigers. So that is your 12 teams in their seeding order for the first ever college football playoffs. And how they ended the regular season was drastically ranked differently than what order you sort of see here. How the seeding worked was the seedings 1 through 4 were kind of the championship automatic bids. So you have the Big Ten champion, Oregon. You have the SEC champion, Georgia. You have the Big 12 champion, Arizona State. And then you have the Mountain West champion, Boise State. Now, Clemson being the ACC champion, you could have flipped them with Mountain West champion or the Big 12 champion. It just depended on how the committee felt. Either one of those 3 teams deserved the automatic bye in the top 3 or 4 seed, and they decided to award that to Boise State and Arizona State. So basically 5 through 12 are at-large bids. Now, the 5 power conferences, as I just mentioned, do get automatic bye. So Clemson was going to be part of the top 12. It just depended on where that they would end up at. So there you have it. And honestly, this is a step in the right direction. As I mentioned at the top, it adds more of a reason for a lot of teams to be able to compete later on into the season. That all these games matter because 12 teams gives your team an even bigger shot here. I mean, look, you have 4 Big Ten teams in this, 3 SEC schools in this, and then you have one of each of the conferences that I mentioned. And two ACC schools, and 3 more of the other conferences I had mentioned. So it creates more of a sense of urgency with some of these games later in the season, as well as conference championship games as well. And I will get into the meaning of conference championship games and what their impact was on this seeding and what teams are in. As well as sort of for what some conferences it might mean more than others. So again, this is a step in the right direction. I think this is going to be just great for college football, and I'm going to be very, very excited to watch and see how all of these games turn out here. The first round, the quarterfinals, semifinals, and of course the championship game as well. I think it just, during the dead period of December, basically, it just gives the college football fan just more to look forward to. Yes, bowl games might start in the next week or so here, but a lot of these bowl games, I mean, no one really watches unless you're a New Year's Six bowl, and that's a whole 3.5, 4 weeks even for some teams to wait, or even the college football fan to sort of watch college football. So it gives more of an opportunity and just more of something to look forward to. And I know for myself, I will definitely be looking forward to seeing how these outcomes come out. So leading into exciting games to watch, there's 2 that stick out the most. And that is the 8-9 seed of Ohio State and Tennessee, and the 7-10 matchup of Notre Dame and IU. So Tennessee and Ohio State, usually when you get those 8 and 9 matchups, if you want to compare it to NCAA basketball and March Madness, when you also have those 8-9 matchups, I believe. You get them the same. Maybe it's not 8-9. Maybe it's a 9-10 seed or something like that. Those are usually like one of the most competitive games because these are teams that you could easily maybe flip-flop here or there. So, I mean, with Ohio State, I mean, their only losses are against Oregon, who's the number 1 team, and against Michigan, who is a bowl-eligible team. And for Tennessee, their 2 losses are against, as well in their conference, their 2 losses are against Arkansas and against Tennessee beat Alabama. I think it was Georgia. So the 2 losses for Tennessee are Georgia and Arkansas. And for Tennessee, both of those losses were on the road. For Ohio State, one was on the road, the other was at home. So that will be a very exciting matchup. For both of these teams, I mean, throughout the year, you never felt like, oh, this is the team to beat. This is the best team. Both of them, of these sides, have really strong rosters, have good components on offense, good components on defense. However, both of these teams, there are some inconsistencies. There's probably a bit more inconsistencies on Tennessee's side than Ohio State's side. But Ohio State's roster is definitely probably one of the best in the entire 12-team field. So I think that'll be such an exciting matchup to watch. The second one is the Indiana Bowl, basically. Notre Dame versus IU. And how great of a story this is that the first ever 12-team playoff, IU football is included in it. I mean, what a year for the Indiana football team. Nobody saw them maybe being bowl eligible. Maybe. And like, that's their peak, 6 wins just based off of recent history or even long-term history. Let alone start the season 10-0. And then they finish the season 11-1. So, and Notre Dame is kind of been that consistent college football program. They're always usually going to end the year somewhere in the top 15 or top 10 even. So, I mean, for them to finish 5, I mean, that's as great. I mean, sorry, they were finished in the regular rankings 5, but to be ranked 7 here, I mean, if you're IU or you're Notre Dame, you couldn't have asked for a better probably matchup. So I think this is going to be a very, very exciting matchup for both of these teams here. There's not that much travel involved here. I mean, the distance between Bloomington and South Bend is probably 3.5 hours at the most. If there's traffic, maybe 4, but somewhere around 3.5 hours. So this is going to be a very, very exciting game. And thank you, the TV networks and college football. They got the Friday night slot on national TV. So there's 1 game on Friday, 3 games on Saturday, and they got the game on Friday, where they will be the only one on, and hopefully it can get a very big audience. But that's going to be exciting to watch as well. So with the college football playoffs and the entire field as you see here, I'm going to go ahead and just let you guys know what my predictions are going to be for this bracket and these playoffs here. So again, these are my predictions, what I think will happen, and if it comes down to it, hopefully I'm right. So without further ado, let's just get into it. So the first game I'm going to talk about is the Texas versus Clemson matchup. It's a battle of 2 orange teams. Go ahead and give me the Texas Longhorns. Between Ohio State and Tennessee, I'm going to take Tennessee. Between Penn State and SMU, Penn State. And then between Notre Dame and IU, drum roll, Go ahead and give me IU. So there you have it. You have your your quarterfinals set up for you, where you have Texas versus Arizona State, Oregon versus Tennessee, Georgia versus IU, and Boise State versus Penn State. So for the quarterfinal matchups between Texas and Arizona State, go ahead and give me Texas. Between Oregon and Tennessee, go ahead and give me Oregon. Boise State and Penn State, I'm going to take Penn State. And then lastly, Georgia versus IU, I'm going to keep riding that train. Go ahead and give me IU. So then that leaves us our semifinal matchups with Texas and Oregon and IU and Penn State. And I think this would be a great semifinals because you have two Big Ten teams who didn't play against each other in the regular season. And then you have two programs, Texas and Oregon, who switched conferences coming into this year. Oregon left the Pac-12 to join the Big Ten, and Texas left the Big 12 to join the SEC. So, I'll go ahead and just say between Texas and Oregon, just give me Oregon. And then between IU and Penn State, yeah, IU. Just give me IU. So that leaves us Oregon versus IU for your national championship game. So Oregon last year missed out on the 4-team playoffs. One would argue they were one of the top teams in the nation last year, but both of their losses were against Washington, who was the national runner-up last year. Other than that, Oregon was a dominant team last year, and they've essentially just built off of that. And this year, Oregon is one of the best. They're the best team. Maybe not head and shoulders, but they're clearly the best team in my eyes. And then there's IU. One could say they're a Cinderella story for the entire year, if not these playoffs, if not like a sleeper team to pick. But don't just count IU as, your grandfather's IU football team. This is a new day and age for the IU football program. New day and age. They have high-powered offense and a really good, fundamentally sound defense. So, between Oregon and IU, Oregon. I know. How did I just pick IU all the way down to this point? And in the end, I pick Oregon to win? It was because I just think Oregon's the best team. I would be happily wrong if IU were to win the whole thing, but I just think Oregon is just the best team, and I think they are poised to win a national championship. So there is my college football playoff rankings. There's some surprises I'm sure that you guys see in there. If I had a sleeper pick, it would be Boise State. I think Heisman favorite Ashton Genty is an incredible running back. He put up, Madden type numbers this year from the running back spot. And it's kind of exciting to see a school from a lesser conference sort of be as good as they were this year, where Boise State's only loss is against Oregon. So it'll be exciting to see them play, and I do not have them winning a game as I have their game versus Penn State winning, but it wouldn't be not surprised to have Boise State, win that game. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to seeing how all this plays out and seeing how it goes. So, as you now see the field being set with the teams that there are there. Did the CFP committee get it right? My opinion, they did not. and for a couple reasons. Just the rankings of where teams are. And again, this is how I would view it. This is my no way or meaning the metrics in which the college football committee used. Some of them are, but again, I'm not in the room. I'm not going to pretend that I know what they're going through, what they're facing, who else is in their ear, what all they're looking at, all the factors. I can only assume and believe with my best guess what, if I were to be put in their shoes, sort of what would be going on in the background that we may not know. But if it were me and I was sitting in the chair and I could control how the teams are seated and who's in, who's not in, then I would have done a completely different field and completely different sort of ranking or seedings of where the teams ended up at. So, with that being said, I would still, probably have Oregon at number 1. I would probably, I might have Georgia at 2. But I guess I'll get, I will tell you my field of 12 a little bit at the end here. But again, why did they put Clemson at 12 and SMU at 11? Both of those ACC teams played in the national championship game. Clemson won. Heading into that game, SMU was ranked maybe 9th or 8th, and Clemson was ranked 17th. Clemson won. So I think Clemson definitely deserved to be in the college football playoffs. And they got that automatic sort of bid in there. But then why on the rankings here do you have Clemson at 12 and SMU at 9? Or sorry, at 11. Why don't you flip them since Clemson won? Because if the conference win didn't mean anything, then why is Georgia number 2 and Texas 5 when both of those two schools met in the SEC championship game? Georgia won, so Georgia's ahead of Texas. Okay, I'm good with that. But why is Clemson not ahead of SMU? Now, when Texas and Georgia met, Texas was number 2 and Georgia was like 7. So that's a 5 ranking difference between those two, and then SMU and Clemson was about 9 ranking difference. But still, both the lower seeds won. So shouldn't both the lower seeds be higher? One of them, Georgia was, Clemson was not. Now, if you're talking about maybe by record-wise, because Clemson lost 3 games heading into the ACC championship game, where SMU only lost 1. For Texas and Georgia, they were both tied with 2 losses. So if that played a factor, okay, fair enough. Then why is Indiana, if that's your case, fine. Why is then Indiana ranked 10th and Ohio State 8th? When both of these teams sat at home last weekend, IU's 11-1 and Ohio State is 10-2. Now, head-to-head, okay, Ohio State beat IU. I get the head-to-head. But, again, both of these teams sat their asses at home. And it's just 1 loss for IU, conference loss too, and then 2 conference losses for Ohio State. So the committee clearly thinks that Ohio State is better than Indiana. Okay. So does the committee clear, even though we just saw Clemson beat SMU, albeit by a field goal at the end of regulation, the committee still feels that SMU is better than Clemson. So what did the point of the ACC championship mean then? I mean, it got, for Clemson, them into the playoffs, but the rankings are just sort of all over the place. And then for a team like Notre Dame, who's not in a conference, they're ranked 7th. So they were the best. What that's saying is they were the best team that sat their butts at home. Because Oregon, Big Ten championship game, they won. Georgia, SEC championship game, they won. Arizona State, Big 12, Boise State, Mountain West. Both of them played in championship games, and they won, so they're the top 4 seeds. Okay, the 5 seed of Texas, they lost against Georgia in the championship game. 6 seed Penn State, they lost against Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. So both of them are 5-6. So Notre Dame is the first team of the teams that didn't play at all, minus SMU and Clemson. So you're saying Notre Dame is over Ohio State and Tennessee. Why? Is that just because they're 11-1 in that instance? But IU's also 11-1. So was it the head-to-head that pushed IU all the way down to 10? Or are you looking at strength of like who they played against, how they played against someone? If you look at the strength of schedule, IU of the 12 teams, IU is second to last as far as their strength of schedule is concerned. Okay, they may not have played against the hardest of teams, but when they did play against teams, they beat the brakes off of them, other than 2 teams. And that was Ohio State, the game in which they lost, and that was at Ohio State. And against Michigan, who IU won, but it was only by 5 points. So Michigan ended up being a good team at the end. Michigan's a bowl team. They won 7 games. Michigan beat Ohio State, by the way, on the road. So you got a triangle here. Ohio State beat IU. IU beat Michigan. Michigan beat Ohio State. So if you don't credit that Michigan win, though, is that why Ohio State and IU are maybe lower in the rankings? Because the Michigan is not a good win for IU? If it's not a good win for IU, then it's got to be a terrible loss for Ohio State. If it's a good win for IU, then it's got to be a bad loss for Ohio State. But they didn't create everything equal here. And I think they mixed too much different categories instead of sticking with one or the other and just having it flow and make a little bit more sense of why teams are seated where a little bit better than what they did. At the end of the day, though, what I'm really glad is that Alabama is not in this thing. It's a little bit like watching the Patriots in the mid-2010s. Sick and tired of them. Just sick and tired of them. And, one could argue, is Alabama better than maybe Boise State? Sure. Or SMU? Sure. Clemson? Yeah. But Alabama, the reason Alabama isn't in this 12-team playoffs is that they did it to themselves. And they lost 3 games. 2 of which an ugly loss. Oklahoma and Vanderbilt. Now, Vanderbilt was probably a little bit better than what we thought, but they ended up winning 6 games. And they beat Alabama when Alabama was the number 1 team. And then Oklahoma, they just got drummed to death. And this is against Oklahoma, who is on a down year this year, by the way. Oklahoma's bowl eligible, but they just won 6 games. That was it. And the other loss is to Georgia, and that's no shame, losing to Georgia. So, yeah, I think that was just the highlight, the cherry on top, is seeing Alabama not in this field here. If they would have put Alabama in, I think it would have been wrong. I think that Ole Miss to me, has a better case to be in than Alabama does. But hey, only 12 teams could get in. So, with the seeding as what it is, if you were to take the same 12 teams and then reorder them to how good I believe via the eye test these teams are, this is how I would do it. So, how I would put them in order is I would have Oregon the number 1 team, Texas the number 2 team, Georgia number 3. And why do I have Texas over Georgia is in that SEC championship game, I think Texas beat themselves. Georgia didn't beat them. Texas beat themselves. So I still think Texas is the better team over Georgia. Even though Texas lost to Georgia in the regular season too. But I still just think Texas is a better team than Georgia. Ohio State as the 4th team. Penn State as the 5th team. And then I would probably do Tennessee, IU, Notre Dame, SMU, Arizona State, and then Clemson to round out how I would do my top 12. So that would obviously reshuffle a lot of these matchups here. In which case you would have what did I say? IU versus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you would have IU versus Boise State, and IU would be at home for that game, and that would be a delicious game for IU. Absolutely. But look, in the end, this is an exciting new thing to look forward to. With these, how many games are there total? 4, 8, 10, 11 games to look forward to. I think we're going to get at least 5 instant classics. So I think there might be some that could be duds, could be blowouts, but I think we'll get at least 5 instant classics, wherever the matchups may be. Maybe the Texas-Clemson game is going to be a lot better than what people think. Maybe SMU versus Penn State. Maybe SMU just says, never mind what we did in the ACC championship game. We're here to make a statement. Maybe a team like Arizona State, where nobody saw coming this year, even their own conference thought that they would be last in their conference this year. Maybe Arizona State shocks the world. Maybe we get a Cinderella story like IU. Go all the way. We'll find out here in the next month or so, maybe the next 6 weeks. I think the championship game is somewhere in the middle of January. But, these are exciting times. And they've got me glued to my seat to see what happens in the end. Where will you be? I'll see you guys next time.